The fairy tale exit that was supposed to fund a freedom empire just slammed into a wall of paperwork, and suddenly the glitter is covered in question marks. Because while the spotlight stayed fixed on red carpets, streaming deals, and carefully staged photo ops, a very different story was quietly stacking up in tax documents. The kind of story that makes charity watchdogs lean forward and start circling lines with red pens. And now those numbers are being talked about in a way that is making even longtime supporters nervous. For years, the brand was crystal clear, compassionate, modern, mission-driven, here to change the world. The messaging was polished, the interviews heartfelt, the speeches soaring. But critics now say the foundation at the center of that humanitarian image is facing uncomfortable scrutiny over how money moved, where it landed, and how much of it translated into visible impact. No official ruling has declared wrongdoing, but the whispers have turned into very loud questions. And in the nonprofit world, questions about finances are never casual. Because here's the thing about running a charity in the United States: vibes don't count, branding doesn't count, emotional speeches definitely don't count. What counts is documentation, grants, programs, measurable outcomes, clean reporting. And observers poring over recent filings have pointed to gaps that they say deserve clarification, especially when compared to the foundation's very high public profile. The louder the publicity, the louder the expectation that receipts will match the rhetoric. At the same time, the organization itself has gone through a dramatic transformation. Staff who once helped build the operation have moved on. The structure shifted into what's described as a leaner model, working through partner organizations rather than running a large in-house team. Supporters frame this as strategic evolution. Skeptics call it downsizing under pressure. Either way, when a foundation shrinks while financial questions grow, people notice, especially people whose job is to monitor nonprofits. Inside industry circles, the chatter is less about headlines and more about patterns. High turnover, big promises, limited publicly detailed outcomes. Again, none of this equals guilt, but experts often say that transparency is a charity's oxygen, and when communication feels thin while complexity rises, confidence drops fast. Donors want to know not just that good intentions exist, but that systems are strong enough to turn those intentions into results. And the timing could not be messier, because this isn't unfolding during a golden streak of career wins. Media partnerships that once sounded like blank check endorsements have reportedly cooled. Projects announced with fanfare didn't always materialize the way audiences expected. Critics argue that the overall brand has struggled to convert attention into consistent delivery, and now the philanthropic arm is getting pulled into that broader narrative of overpromise versus output. What makes the situation especially combustible is the image contrast. This was the couple who spoke often about accountability, about modern leadership, about doing things differently. So when their own foundation faces calls for clearer explanations, the irony writes itself, and critics are not being subtle about pointing it out. Fair or not, expectations rise when you position yourself as a model of transparency. Fall short of that standard, and the backlash hits twice as hard. Nonprofit analysts frequently note that regulators don't care about celebrity, titles, or media sympathy. They care about compliance. If questions reach a certain threshold, reviews can happen, routine, procedural, but stressful and reputation shaking all the same. No investigation has been publicly announced here, but the mere conversation about that possibility is enough to rattle donors, partners, and advisors who prefer calm waters over controversy. Meanwhile, public perception moves faster than any audit. Online, former fans debate line items like amateur accountants. Comment sections filled with people asking where specific impacts can be found. The shift is noticeable. Admiration turning into skepticism, curiosity turning into suspicion. And once trust erodes in the charity space, rebuilding it is slow, expensive, and emotionally draining, because trust is the currency nonprofits trade in most. Behind the scenes, advisors are almost certainly urging careful communication, clearer reporting, and visible course correction. That's the standard crisis management playbook when scrutiny hits. But reputational storms don't just pass because a press release says everything is fine. They pass when evidence feels solid, when numbers make sense to outsiders, and when actions match the values that built the brand in the first place. And hovering over all of this is a bigger, more existential question. Was the post-royal reinvention built on a foundation strong enough to handle real-world pressure? But because celebrity attention can launch a venture, but only structure, governance, and consistent delivery can sustain one. The glow of independence, the narrative of bold new beginnings, those are powerful stories. But paperwork has a way of dragging stories back down to earth. Right now, nothing is officially condemned, nothing legally concluded, but the gap between image and inquiry is widening, and that gap is where reputations wobble. If If clarity comes quickly and convincingly, this becomes a rough chapter in a longer journey. If not, critics will say this was the moment the shine cracked and the scrutiny stuck. Either way, the conversation has shifted from inspiration to investigation vibes, and that is a very different spotlight to stand in. And just when it looked like the storm couldn't get louder, the conversation around the foundation started bleeding into something even more dangerous than bad: press credibility fatigue. Because here's what happens when headlines, hype, and heartfelt speeches collide with spreadsheets that outsiders say they don't fully understand. People stop clapping and start auditing in their heads. Supporters begin asking polite questions. Critics start asking sharp ones. And suddenly, every past promise gets replayed under a harsher light. The issue isn't just numbers on a form. It's expectation versus explanation. The foundation was introduced as a bold, impact-driven force for change, tied directly to a couple who built their post-royal identity on compassion and modern leadership. So when analysts say they're struggling to trace a clear line between donations raised and programs visibly delivered, that disconnect feels bigger than accounting. It feels personal to the brand story that was sold. Again, these are questions and interpretations, not legal conclusions, but in the public arena, perception moves faster than any official process. What's making insiders extra uneasy is how this moment overlaps with the broader pattern that's followed the couple's ventures: big launches, massive anticipation, then a quiet fade, a restructuring, or a pivot explained as strategic. One or two times, that's business. Repeated across media deals, lifestyle projects, and now a charitable arm under scrutiny, critics say it starts to look like a cycle of overextension followed by retreat. And when a charity appears inside that cycle, the emotional temperature rises fast. Because charities don't get judged like startups or streaming shows. If a TV project underperforms, it's disappointing. If a charity can't clearly show impact, people feel misled. Donors don't just give money, they give trust, belief, and often a piece of their own story. That's why nonprofit experts keep repeating the same mantra: clarity, documentation, outcomes. Not vibes, not visibility. Receipts in the form of real-world change. Observers say that's where they want to see stronger, more detailed communication. Behind the scenes, this kind of spotlight tends to trigger a scramble. Advisors review language. Lawyers double-check filings. Communications teams debate how much to say, how fast to say it, and whether silence looks safer than statements. But silence has its own risks. In the age of social media speculation, gaps get filled with theories, and the longer explanations take, the more dramatic those theories become. That's exactly the atmosphere forming now, not proven scandal, but a thick fog of suspicion fed by incomplete understanding. Meanwhile, the couple's public image adds fuel. They didn't position themselves as quiet philanthropists working behind the scenes. They position themselves as visible changemakers, outspoken about ethics, fairness, and accountability. Admirable values, but they come with a mirror effect. When you speak loudly about standards, people measure you by those same standards with a microscope. Critics say that's the bind here. The higher the moral branding, the lower the tolerance for ambiguity. And let's talk timing, because timing in reputation crises is everything. If this scrutiny had surfaced during a streak of clear, celebrated wins, it might have landed softer. But arriving after cooling media partnerships and mixed reviews on other ventures, it feeds a growing narrative that the post-royal empire hasn't matched its early promise. Fair or unfair, narratives stack. One question becomes a pattern becomes a reputation, and reputations are brutally hard to reverse once they calcify. Still, it's important to separate online drama from formal reality. Regulatory reviews, if they ever happen, are methodical and evidence-based. Public outrage is emotional and speculative. The two don't move at the same speed. Right now, what exists publicly are raised eyebrows, expert commentary, and louder than usual calls for detailed transparency. That's uncomfortable, but it's not a verdict. The danger lies in how long the discomfort lingers without clear reassurance. For the couple, the path forward isn't glamorous, but it is straightforward, radical clarity. Break down spending, highlight specific beneficiaries, show measurable outcomes, let independent partners speak. In the nonprofit world, sunlight really is the best PR strategy. Glossy storytelling built the brand, but granular reporting is what could steady it now. The question is whether they're willing to shift from narrative control to document-driven trust rebuilding. Because make no mistake, this moment is bigger than one foundation. It's a crossroads for their entire reinvention. If they can demonstrate that the structure behind the image is solid, this becomes a dramatic scare they survive. If they can't, critics will say this was the turning point when admiration fully tipped into doubt. And doubt, once it hardens, follows every future project like a shadow that never quite leaves the room. What makes it all feel so cinematic is the contrast between the dream that launched this chapter chapter and the paperwork now driving the conversation. The dream was freedom, impact, independence, a new way of doing things. The paperwork is rules, ratios, compliance, oversight. One runs on inspiration, the other runs on precision. Successful charities need both. Right now, observers are waiting to see whether inspiration can be backed up with the kind of precision that quiets the noise.